Welcome to MedTech Speed to Data, a KeyTech podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rogers, VP of Business Development at KeyTech. Each month, me and a KeyTecher are going to interview a MedTech leader and talk to them about the critical data-driven decisions they make in their programs. Hey everybody, welcome back to MedTech Speed to Data. I'm your host, Andy Rogers. I'm here with Kevin Jackson, Chief Operating Officer of AlgometRx. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, very excited to get into your story, talk about your product, and share some insights for other startup companies that are coming off an election year, looking at fundraising, hopefully picking up, into 2025, sharing some stories from AlgometRx. So let's get going. So let's start. Kevin, why don't you share for our audience a little bit of your background? Where did you come from? What's your experience that led you to AlgometRx?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say my background and AlgometRx are very closely linked. So I started working with Dr. Julia Finkel, who's the founder of AlgometRx. She is an anesthesiologist at Children's National Hospital here in DC. So I started working with her as an undergrad, and I was a research intern in her lab. So that was kind of one of my first research exposures, was working with her, kind of just on a more straightforward clinical research program. And then following graduation from undergrad, I was studying human biology. And I was kind of doing what I assume is a pretty classic debate of like, do I go into medicine? Do I do something else? Do I stay in the research world? And so she offered me a position to just kind of continue doing research in the lab. And I was really enjoying it. And we were doing, pain medicine research, which is what, you'll quickly learn is what AlgometRx is all about. So I started working with her just immediately out of undergrad. And so she had been, researching technologies similar to AlgometRx for a really long time. And I was just excited to get involved and kind of see where things were going. And very quickly after I joined the lab, so I joined the lab, kind of summer of 2015, we had the finding that allowed us to kind of run with the technology that has become the AlgometRx nosiometer. And so it's kind of, for me, it was really quick, but for her, it was years of working in this pain medicine space. And so, once we had the finding, we pretty quickly did some proof of concept stuff and raised an initial seed round and then founded AlgometRx. And so, when I say my background is very close with AlgometRx, it's kind of like most of my career has been AlgometRx, first on the research side. And then now I've transitioned more to the business development and kind of operations side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great story, Kevin. Just like doing undergraduate research. I remember when I was in college, I loved it. My story isn't nearly as good as yours in terms of blossoming into a company, but I always enjoyed those like interactions with professors. You're so young and impressionable, and just like working with someone who knows the market. So the fact that you're able to spin that out, is huge. So you mentioned that nosiometer. Why don't you just describe the premise of the platform for AlgometRx and how it's used in pain management?
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, I think platform is a great word to use there. So we call it a platform technology, and its official name is a nosiometer. So what it does is it allows us to objectively and non-invasively characterize pain type and pain intensity. So the way we use that is in a variety of patients with pain. We're able to identify kind of the physiologic underpinnings of that pain experience. And that allows clinicians to have a better understanding of what's happening kind of behind the scenes. And we don't have to get into a whole dissertation of like pain and what is pain and what isn't pain, but just quickly, pain is a very, inherently subjective experience. And so, at its simplest form, it's an experience that only the patient can kind of quantify and identify for you. Right. But at the same time, there's a root cause of that pain, and so there's something going on that's causing them to feel that kind of way. And what we're doing is we're kind of putting parameters and measurements around that side of things. So what's causing that experience, and so ultimately what is manifesting in their experience as pain. We're looking kind of earlier in that and allowing clinicians to characterize that, and then that allows improved treatment and kind of just a better fundamental understanding of that patient experience.
Got it. So let's just break it down just a little bit more for the audience. Let's just say I'm a patient. I have back pain. So I assume this measurement can be used for kind of any sort of pain. And so just describe the measurement
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So what we do is we use electrical stimulus to selectively activate different nerve fibers, and the different fiber types transmit different sensations. So what we do is we activate a given fiber type, we measure the response to that, and we do that across different types of nerve fibers, and that allows us to identify where that pain process is ongoing. So which fiber type is involved in that, and so like you said, it can be used across different types of pain, and what we're able to see is which fiber types are involved. And that gives us a sense of, what is potentially the process behind it. So something like back pain may be like a neuropathic type pain where there's actually disease of the nerve. Or it may be a compression type pain where, there's something that is pressing on a nerve and causing that sensation. And we're able to identify, okay, which nerve fiber is involved and therefore better understand the process that could be causing that back pain. And then that allows the clinician to understand, well, what's an appropriate treatment? Is it medication? Is it physical therapy? Is it surgery?
Yeah. And then you use your measurement or test rather, to try and quantify pain initially, and then you can measure results as therapies are being applied to see whether they're working. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's kind of the main offering. I mean, there's a lot of just benefit to being able to understand what's going on, kind of at that first point. But really the value is once you add a treatment, once you add a therapy, measuring the response to that. And so often in pain medicine, patients are given a drug and it's a very trial and error thing. Here's a medication, come back in 3 months, let us know if you feel any better. And sometimes they do feel better and that's great. Sometimes they don't. But we're trying to kind of eliminate that need for this trial and error. And instead, here's what we think is the best drug based on the mechanism. And then let's measure the response to that. So a week later, let's do a follow-up measurement. Is your phenotype kind of returning towards what we'd expect, is normal? And that gives the clinician a lot of different, information that they previously wouldn't have had. So should they increase the dose? Should they change the dose? Is this the right medication at all? And maybe it's not, medication that's the appropriate therapy. Maybe it is physical therapy or surgery or something like that.
Yeah. Gotcha. So, super interesting. A lot of waste in our healthcare system on admitted. My wife works in the ER. She has pain. She calls them pain seekers.
Yep.
Coming in all the time, and someone will say they have shoulder pain and they can't raise their arm, and then she'll trick. I shouldn't be saying this out loud, but she'll trick them and say like close that cabinet for me because I gotta, I can't reach it, and they do it. And you're like, see, your shoulder's fine. So things like that. So having a more objective sort of test, I think, would be great. So let me ask just the stupid question then on the unmet need. Like, how do you convert this? It all makes sense to me, but how do you convert this into like a clear initial need to quantify the value and like the business case for this? Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to think about it. We kind of approach it from two ways. One is just, adding just an objective, easy to use tool in kind of the toolbox of clinicians. So if you think of, it's not a direct comparison, but say like a cardiologist, they have an infinite number of tools. They have EKGs, they have echoes, they have all these different tools that can kind of allow them to understand what's going on. In addition to you saying, hey, sometimes, I get lightheaded or sometimes my heart races. Pain physicians are really limited in what they're able to do. They have mostly just the patient report, which is important, but, we are trying to give them a tool that allows them to understand, okay, you feel this way. Let's try to better understand why that may be. So that's kind of the overall unmet need. And where we see the biggest unmet need initially is kind of chronic pain patients, right? If you break your arm and you go to the ER, there's not a lot of question as to what's your pain. We know the cause of your pain. There's pretty clear pathways on how to treat it. But you have patients with chronic pain who have been dealing with chronic illness, and they have really complicated cases. They've been passed around maybe from doctor to doctor because no one really can quantify what's happening. It's really just their experience. And so giving those patients a tool to say, we're validating what's going on and we're identifying what's going on, and then we can treat you appropriately and hopefully improve their care. And then kind of from the business sense, it's a couple things. It's that tool that allows, hospitals and clinicians to have, just a more objective measure of what they're doing, right? It's a performance character, or, a performance metric that previously didn't exist. So they can say, we made this decision based on this, our measurement, and we're able to measure the impact of that. That's really big right now in kind of, patient-reported outcomes and hospital ratings are becoming more and more important. So having a metric that you can treat to improve care is important. And then also on the, the medication side of things, avoiding unnecessary drugs and, going down the route of, obviously the opioid crisis is still ongoing in this country, and avoiding as much as possible when opioids may not be appropriate, but also using them when they are, because there's a reason clinicians do still use them. And allowing a clinician to confidently say this is the appropriate drug is huge. And there's no longer this second guessing of, well, maybe it's this, but let's try something else. We can get right to the root of it, and you avoid maybe 6, 7, 8 visits later when you actually find the proper medication for a patient.
Got it. Yeah, super valuable. Okay, so let's get into the meat of the podcast here. So speed to data. Again, our audience is comprised of global entrepreneurs that are looking at new products for their global company, as well as many entrepreneurs that are in similar shoes you're in, or maybe coming out of college and trying to decide whether they should start this company or not. So I want to focus on the data that you were trying to collect and how you went about doing that. So let's go back in time, maybe a decade ago or so, when you were, working with Dr. Julie Finkel in the lab there at GW. Early on, and maybe when you were graduating. Let's just put it that way. When you graduated college, what data were you looking for? Or did you collect to say, hey, you know what, this is actually, there's something here, and how did you go about doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So fortunately, like I said, Dr. Finkel had been working on these technologies for a while. So we had kind of an understanding, and she had a goal to develop a tool like this. She wanted something that she could use in clinic to help better understand, patients' pain. And so, she had evaluated other technologies before, and really found that, one of the most important things was kind of like clinical utility. It's just like, there's a lot of research tools out there that are useful for research. How do we make that clinically useful? So one of our early things was trying to find something, that's kind of simple to use, simple enough to use that anyone could use it. It could be used in a variety of settings versus like, functional MRI, where it's you're going to a scanner. This is where you're going to learn about your pain experience. So when we had kind of the initial finding that allowed us to kind of start exploring this, we were using 2 predicate unrelated technologies. And so we were using kind of this neurostimulator that I referenced earlier, and then we were using kind of a standalone video pupillometer. And so we had combine the two, kind of fundamentally and theoretically, but not physically. So our first goal was to kind of validate that relationship between, electrical stimulation and neurospecific stimulation, and what we use as our endpoint, which is pupillary dilation, kind of validating that relationship is robust enough to go forward. So our first couple studies were done at Children's National, both in patients with pain, and in healthy volunteers, just kind of validating that relationship, looking at performance characteristics, when we increase intensities, when we change nerve fibers, what are the impacts on kind of what our outcome measure is, which is that pupillary dilation. And so for the first, probably 6, 8, 10 months, we were just doing a variety of studies trying to figure out, robustness, I think is the word I would use. Where does this fall apart? How strong is this? And what we found is that it's really reliable and really robust. And so that gave us the confidence to start kind of trying to run with it, and ultimately led us to developing, an initial prototype that actually combines these technologies and adds a lot of the functionality that we have today.
Gotcha. Kevin, 2 quick follow-up questions. The first, So how did you simulate pain, right? You mentioned you're trying to just demonstrate the correlation. How did you do that?
Yeah, so a big part of our devices, and this is again trying to not go too deep down the pain side of things, but there's devices out there that are used in research, and they're called quantitative sensory tests. And what they do is they actively cause pain and ask you to kind of respond to that. So something like a heat pad, right, will just increase the heat until you say that hurts, or until you say that's uncomfortable. And that is useful for pain research, but it's not something we're ever going to do clinically. And so our goal when we were developing this is looking at something that is, kind of non-painful, and just trying to really understand what's going on in your body already. We're not trying to add an insult. We're not trying to cause pain. We're trying to look at what's going on in your body already. So what's unique about our technology is it is non-painful. So all it does is it activates your sensory nerve fibers with a small electrical stimulus. And so that stimulus basically just turns your fiber on, and then that nerve fiber is going to transmit as if it received a natural stimulus. And what that allows us to do is kind of simulate your environment. So if you have ongoing pain and we activate that fiber, it's going to transmit as if there's pain, even though we aren't causing that pain. That's just your kind of fundamental underpinning right now. And so what we do is we just activate those fibers. We don't cause pain. And that's why, our early studies, we're looking at patients without pain and patients with pain. So we're not introducing pain. We're more trying to characterize what does someone who doesn't have pain look like and what does someone who does have pain look like. And that's why, early steps was validating this in those two populations.
Gotcha. All right. So my second question for you, which I think might be part of the key to your success, you mentioned Children's National. Can you describe your affiliation with Children's National and how you've sort of leveraged that to your success, maybe in the early days?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're still a huge partner of ours today. So, so we do love Children's National. So Dr. Finkel she spent her entire career post training at Children's National. So she's a pediatric anesthesiologist. And they have a really unique, really cool environment. It's called the Sheikh Zayed Institute for Pediatric Surgical Innovation. And so she kind of operates in that capacity. So that is a kind of engineering forward environment. So it's not your traditional wet labs, while they do exist. And so her lab is in this kind of background of engineering, biomedical engineering, and entrepreneurship. So they encourage companies to develop and spin out and things like that. And so, while she was doing her research in a traditional sense, there was this background of, looking for patentable technologies, going out and finding investors and things like that. And so when we first had this finding, obviously first steps at the hospital are to apply for patents and kind of patent this. And then we license those patents as AlgometRx. And so, Children's is still a partner of ours because they still have a vested interest in the technology. They own the patents and we've licensed it from them. And so as part of that relationship, Dr. Finkel and her lab at Children's continue to, generate data using this technology in addition to the other research that they do. And so they've been fundamental partners from the beginning, further validating the technology, generating more data. And it's been huge for us, like you said, just having access to patients and data, at an early stage.
Yeah. I mean, it seems almost like it's such an obvious thing to do if you're a startup medical device companies to very early develop an affiliation with a hospital system, right? Just to get access, friendly access to patients, to get that data that matters so much. So very cool. So Kevin, can you describe now current times where you are in development and what data is most critical for AlgometRx to collect?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we're kind of at an interim stage. So just to back up very quickly, we developed an initial proof of concept prototype back in 2018. And so we use that pretty much until present day, generating more data, further building out kind of our understanding of this approach, this technology, where it's applicable, its strengths and things like that. And, that was a useful prototype, but it really isn't robust enough to kind of move forward with clinical studies and clinical trials and ultimately, moving through the FDA. So right now we're working with KeyTech to develop our, kind of more robust, what we'll call like a beta version of our device that ultimately will be our commercializable version of the device. And so the goal, once we have that delivered, is to, complete some, formal validation studies in specific patient populations and use that data to inform our clinical trials for the FDA. And so we're at this kind of in between where we're planning those studies. We're waiting for the device to kind of, complete its development. And then we'll really collect what is that, that validation data that the FDA wants to see, that, clinicians want to see before they're going to, ever try to use this. And then we'll take that data to the FDA and likely have one more pivotal study, just to kind of validate everything from the FDA's perspective. And then hopefully we'll have an initial kind of de novo clearance for at least one indication.
Got it. I was going to ask your path to clearance. So it's a de novo.
Yeah. Route. Yeah. De novo pathway. And I'll just plug really quickly, kind of talking about data. And so we talked to the FDA way back in 2018. So we didn't even have a device at that point, but we had this kind of novel concept of a pain biomarker and a device for pain. And so we wanted to talk to them about really, how would we even bring a device like this? This is a first of its kind device. How would we bring that through the FDA? And they were really helpful in guiding our approach to date. They want us to show its performance in various populations. And really what we'll ultimately have to do is get clearance in several different populations. So it's not just one big clearance for pain. They said we want to see it in inflammatory type pain. We want to see it in neuropathic type pain, and even populations within those groups. So that was really helpful for us early on, interacting with FDA, learning this is what they expect to see, so that all of our studies following that were kind of with that mindset. It was no longer, well, we just need to look at pain. It's looking at specific types of pain, looking at unique populations that we can say, in this pretty heterogeneous population, here's what we see. And that was really helpful. So now when we're interacting with the FDA now, we really have kind of their thought process ingrained in what we're doing. And that was, I think, invaluable for us in our development.
Yeah, that's smart. I mean, you're segmenting your market and kind of doing it lockstep with FDA guiding you. That's very smart. As you were talking, and we'll now pivot to the future and what data is most important for your venture. I have to ask, are you considering partnerships with some of these therapy providers, right? That I know that you're basically trying to diagnose pain and objectively diagnose pain and characterize it. But from the business perspective, is there any interest to partner with some of these drug companies, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there's two ways we really would love to engage with pharma, and we have had initial conversations, just talking about this technology and how they can use it. So there's two ways, and the first way I'll say is what we think is our most applicable approach, is as an endpoint for clinical trials. So even before clinically, for these pharma companies and these people developing new treatments, they're conducting studies with the same limitations as what we've identified in practice, which is a lack of an objective endpoint. And so that increases expense for their trials. It also may, negatively impact their trials if you're relying on, kind of subjective endpoints for your outcomes. And so we really are interested in interacting with them to basically serve as an endpoint. So even, prior to clinical use, let's help you develop a treatment that, we can show works, the way you say it works, kind of just lockstep with them, like you said. And then, once that treatment's approved, it's been validated on our device. And so that, I think, from our perspective, would also encourage clinicians to use it as an endpoint in clinical settings as well. And then similarly, I think, kind of what your question made me think of is this idea of a combination product, right? So you have a device that,
Right.
is using alongside a drug. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, but from our perspective, I think it's kind of limiting what we may want to do. And so we're a little bit more excited of the idea of being a clinical trial endpoint, a little bit more broad. And then, potentially, combination product would be a quick way to get to market. But I think we're kind of almost past that at this point, where we kind of know where our first, entry is going to be. And so unless someone came to us with a drug tomorrow that we think could really speed up our pathway, I think, it's not a bad idea, but it would almost be taking us a step back to go that route at this point.
Yep. No, yeah, that's interesting. We do a lot of work in the pharma space, and we're seeing more and more of these drug delivery platform companies, and similar digital plays, launch and go to market as a clinical trial device. The market's big enough for it. So, I agree with your strategy, go to market without being a combination product, but that could be sort of like a fast follow. And all of our pharma customers out there, if you're interested, reach out to Kevin.
Let me know. Yeah. Yeah. And we're, we've started this kind of idea of a clinical trial endpoint, and just on a fundamental level, they want some validation, right? So we think after an initial clearance, there's that kind of seal of approval from a safety perspective, from an FDA perspective. And so we hope to, kind of use that to leverage in that kind of clinical trial world. So that's definitely high up on our list of opportunities to pursue.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So Kevin, let's jump to the lightning round. I have a new one for you. It wasn't on the list I sent ahead of time, but I figured I would ask. So the company's maybe 10 years old, right? Can you just share your company size, how you guys are structured? Because I feel like that's really important, right, for these smaller ventures.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have a unique approach to this, and it works really well for us. But we are, a company of one full-time paid employee. That's me. And what we've done is we've run really lean, just relying on our board members, on our, Dr. Finkel is a founder, but she isn't a paid employee. She still, provides scientific advice. And our board, who are serial entrepreneurs, but also, engineers and experts in various disciplines. And so we've kind of relied on their experience, my kind of day-to-day operational experience. And then we do a lot of consulting and contracting work. So we don't have, a robust kind of employee base, but we have a robust network of consultants and contractors who we've worked with, from early days. I talk about regulatory, we've been working with the same, regulatory consultant from day one, reimbursement similarly. So we've kind of run this, lean approach where, we really only bring in people as needed, because so early on, it was just validating the device and doing a lot of the research stuff. And likely, like I said, that was happening a lot, at Children's National, which is really helpful. And so we were able to kind of run pretty lean. And obviously our investors love that idea, because it's not, spending money on salary, it's spending money on device development and data generation. And that's really worked well for us.
I mean, that's fascinating, actually. I mean, it makes sense the way you're describing. You're kind of surrounding yourself with a team of best in class, right? But I assume at some point you're going to want to build the team. I guess as a follow up, is there any plan once I guess you get more momentum going, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So our plan right now is as we get closer to FDA, once we are likely to have a commercial product, which is probably in the next 2 years, I would say, is then start to build out the team. So bringing on a formal CEO, bringing on, probably more in the sales department, likely bringing a couple engineers in-house. Like I said, we've been working with, experts like KeyTech. And so, you guys have provided a lot of the device development side of things. And once we've developed the device, bringing some people in-house to help manage that is going to be beneficial. So we definitely have a roadmap for building out the team. But at this point, it's kind of trying to keep things as lean as possible. And then when the time comes, absolutely, building out a, kind of a full executive team, building out a sales team, definitely, kind of in the cards.
Gotcha. Okay. Next affiliation question for you. I know AlgometRx is a JLabs company, right? Can you describe what that is and how you're leveraging JLabs?
Absolutely, yeah. So JLabs is Johnson & Johnson Innovations, which is the innovation arm of Johnson & Johnson. It is their no strings attached incubator. So there's several of them across the country and actually around the world. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they opened one in DC in it was right around 2020, 2021. And so we were one of the initial companies there. And it's a no strings attached incubator that's, kind of affiliated with J&J. So they provide a lot of interaction with J&J executives. You get, kind of paired with they call them a J-Pal, but it's someone who, is from the company, but, kind of relevant to your space. And so you can use them as a resource for, asking questions and kind of idea validation. And then they also have a ton of partners as well. Law firms, patent attorneys, things like that, that you have access to kind of ask your early stage questions. And then they also just have, lab space and prototyping space and office space as well. So kind of on a functional level, it's our office. It's where we host meetings. It's where we host investors. But on a theoretical or kind of, practical level, it's also where we get a lot of advice. So going back to, talking about, pharmaceutical companies, like we have direct access to J&J. So we like to, ask them questions when we were trying to validate this idea of like, is there value in a clinical trial endpoint? We were able to have some conversations with them and understand from the pharma side, what's their perspective? What are they looking for in a technology like that? So that level of access has really been the most important. It's just those conversations, they're non-binding, it's nothing formal, but it's to get us access to people that would otherwise be really challenging to access.
Do you pay like a monthly fee for it? I see.
Yeah, there's a lease agreement. I mean, it's reasonable, but there's a fee for that. We initially got in through they have these quick fire challenges, which I would encourage anyone listening to seek out, and they'll provide usually grant funding and access to JLabs for say 1 free year or 6 free months, and that was kind of how we first got started. But we were enjoying it so much that we do pay to be a member, and would say it's absolutely worthwhile.
Gotcha. Awesome. So Children's National, JLabs, it seems like we're building this blueprint here. So the next node in the blueprint, ARPA-H, right?
Yes.
So can you describe your affiliation with ARPA-H and maybe in the context overall of fundraising in 2025?
Yeah, so ARPA-H is an awesome new program. It's under the umbrella of HHS, but it kind of runs independently of, say, NIH. And they are, I don't know the formal term, but, kind of what I would call them is like a moonshot program. And so their idea is to kind of model after DARPA, which we all know for defense, and do the same for healthcare research. So identifying high risk, high reward projects, and providing them the funds to pursue them. So they have a ton of different programs across, all areas of medicine. Cancer is a big one for them, obviously. But recently they put out this program. It's called the Sprint for Women's Health. And it's a 2-year, kind of sprint style program. And they provide funding for companies addressing women's health issues. And so, in collaboration with Children's National and Johns Hopkins, AlgometRx was awarded a 2-year grant to basically pursue this technology, to fund development and research associated with, the idea of, pain being a huge problem in women's health. Women have pain that's not typically recognized because previous research studies weren't, done in women, they were done in men. And so, there's a lot of insufficient evidence in pain medicine in women. And so part of our, mandate for this program is to develop better outcomes develop a measure to improve outcomes for women's health. And so it's a sprint style program. It's a contract. So it's not like a traditional grant program. So we work with them to build out a statement of work, and we have a bunch of, kind of milestones that we plan to execute on. And as part of that, in total, the award across all 3 sites is around $9 million. And so it's a significant level of funding, especially, kind of just talking about fundraising in general. We've had NIH SBIRs before, which are much less funding, still very important and useful. But something like this is a game changer for us and a lot of the other companies that are participating. So,
all right. Who are you working with at Johns Hopkins? Is there a particular lab there?
Yeah, so we're working with, it's more on the clinical side. So we're working with Dr. Michelle Petrie, who's a rheumatologist, and Dr. Michael Polydefkis, who's a neurologist. And so that's part of our goal in validating this technology. They have access to large patient populations. So Dr. Petrie is looking at systemic lupus, and Dr. Polydefkis is going to be looking at carpal tunnel syndrome, which is a neuropathic type pain. So we've kind of brought them in to help us build out, the database, not database, but, the base of data across these different populations. And so this will be our first time working with them, but we've been collaborating and kind of in conversation with them for a while. So it's an exciting way to introduce new collaborators and also receive funding for really exciting projects. So,
yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So common theme across this whole episode is, choose your partnerships well.
Absolutely.
Seems like, and you can do that almost virtually as a company and make great strides. So, Kevin, thanks so much for coming on and, sharing your story of AlgometRx. Is there anything else you want to share about where you guys are headed and into the future, or anything like that?
I mean, we're just really excited to kind of hopefully introduce this new technology that really revolutionizes pain medicine. We're hoping to really make an impact and make this a device that everyone kind of interacts with anytime they go to the doctor. So long term, that's our goal. But in the short term, we hope to help patients with chronic pain, and hopefully you'll see this in clinic soon.
Yeah. All right. That's it, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to MedTech Speed to Data. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to MedTech Speed to Data, a KeyTech podcast. Join us each month for more ways to get the right data faster to inform critical decisions. Find additional resources on our website, keytechinc.com. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, and please leave a review on iTunes whenever you listen. Thanks. Bye.